Do you have the time, interest, or possibly desire to change your boat's oil? Follow along as we do an oil change on our Axis's Crusader 409 or PCM V8 engine. This is an incredibly common engine. It is created by PCM, also sold under the Crusader brand. Malibu and Axis also call it the Monsoon engine. At the end of the day, it's a 409 6-liter V8 engine, and the oil is like super easy to change. So let's get into it. In order to properly change the oil, you need to start with 5 quarts of Mobil 1 5W30 is what we used. But it definitely does need to be 5W30 oil, whether you go with full synthetic Mobil 1, that's up to you. You also need an oil filter. You can use the factory PCM Crusader R077001 oil filter, or you can find a comparable filter at your local auto parts store. Again, this is just a straightforward GM block oil filter, so nothing super crazy about that. You also need an oil filter wrench. I personally prefer the band type oil filter wrench. I feel like it does a really good job versus the more wrench style. You also need a plastic bag to help remove the oil filter. And I also use a marker just for writing down the date and hours on the oil filter. Always nice to keep that handy. And then you also need an oil extractor. There are a bunch of different ones out there, so use whatever you're comfortable with. But what really makes a difference for me in my situation is that the drain hose does not fit through the back transom plug. So you have to have a special barb fitting that attaches to the end of your oil extractor line that then screws onto the oil drain line. Starting out, you want to go ahead and get the boat warmed up just a little bit. So we do have to connect it to the fake lake, or if you have the transom water hookup, you can go that route. Once you get the water going, go ahead and start up the engine. You're not gonna have to let the engine warm up to operating temperature, but you just wanna get the oil a little bit warmed up, especially if you're doing this during the off season. Once you've done that, go ahead and turn off the engine, let it sit for about 5 minutes or so. And after that, we have to pull up the rear lockers. So we're gonna pull up each of those. We're going to remove the tray over the engine. And we're also going to remove the starboard locker divider. So that will give us more access. You should be able to now see the engine, the drain tube, the oil filter, fill tube, and dipstick, everything that we need to get this job done. I have used this oil extractor. I bought it from West Marine years ago, and I've used it on several boats. It is absolutely awesome. But then what really makes the difference here is that 1/4-inch barb fitting. I did use a tiny bit of thread seal just to be able to really snug it in there. But again, up to you, but I just went a little bit above and beyond. Next up, we always want to remove our oil fill cap, even if we're draining. And then we're simply just going to hook up. We're going to go ahead and create suction. Again, do that however you see fit. With this, it's just, I think, like 15 pumps on the extractor, and it's immediately sucking out the oil, which is really awesome. After that, you're just going to go ahead and thread back on the cap and then put the drain tube back to where it was. Next up, we're going to remove the old oil filter. This, obviously, this is where you're going to need a plastic bag just to make sure that you don't drop any oil down into the bilge. No one likes that, and no one likes a nasty bilge. This is also where you're going to need the oil filter wrench. Use the plastic bag once you've got a good amount of the oil filter off of the thread. And we'll make sure that we clean up that area, and also make sure that you do have the gasket on the old oil filter. You don't want to put a new oil filter on with the gasket still attached. Additionally, we will want to take a little bit of new oil, put that on the gasket, and then I also recommend writing down the date and the current engine hours on the filter, so then that way you keep that nice and handy for your reference. Go ahead, spin it back on, and literally according to the side of the oil filter from PCM, it says you want to take it all the way to where it's tight and then go another 3/4 turns. You don't have to over tighten it. Next up, we're going to go ahead, get our funnel, and put in 4 quarts of fresh oil. And this is where you will put your oil cap back on and check your dipstick. And what we're going to then do is start the engine back up. So same process for hooking up your water and everything else. We're going to run the engine for a few moments, turn it off, give it 5 more minutes for the oil to seep back down into the pan, and then we're going to check our engine oil level again. It truly is that easy, and you're good to go for at least another 50 hours.